School Board is called to order at 6 p.m. on Tuesday, December 4th, 2018, in room 137 of the Edison Building. Present at the board table is Mr. Michael Munoz, Superintendent of Schools, and a non-voting ex officio member of the board. Also present is Ms. Wendy Edgar, the Assistant Board Clerk. Ms. Edgar, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Barlow.
Here.
Mrs. Becker.
Here.
Chair Marvin.
Here.
Mr. Schleusner.
Here.
Ms. Seelinger.
Here.
Mr. Smith. Ms. Workman.
Here.
Let's stand as we are able for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
2.01, approval of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda?
No changes?
Move approval.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the agenda. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is approved. 7.01, approval of school district property taxes payable in 2019. Mr. Munoz.
Yes, at this time, I'm going to have John Carlson, Executive Director of Finance, brief us on this item.
Good evening, Chair Marvin, Superintendent Munoz, and school board members. It's fun to be here for the annual Truth in Taxation Property Tax Levy hearings. So what we're going to do tonight is go through a few things about the budget and about the taxes, and then we'll allow some time for you guys to ask questions, and then the public is allowed to make comments. So first, I wanted to start with some recent finance highlights. As you heard last week, the auditor told you that the unassigned general fund balance finished at $19.1 million, which was approximately 8.7%. There we go. You also heard that we had a clean audit report, and you heard from our financial advisors that we recently had our credit rating reaffirmed at AA and stable. And I was looking back, the last report I had from S&P showed that there are 8 school districts that have that rating in the state of Minnesota. 3 have 1 notch higher, and 2 have the AAA rating. So we're within the top 12 by S&P as far as credit quality. And our tax base has been expanding and growing. It grew at 8.1% from 2018 to the start of 2019. So again, at this public hearing, what we need to do is we need to talk about last year's results from our revenues and expenses. We need to talk about the current year school district budget, and we need to talk about the proposed tax levy, and then we need to take public comments. So just a reminder, the school district levy cycle is just a little bit different from the county and the city. What we establish as the certified levy next week will be for taxes payable in 2019. That is the same as the city and county. However, that revenue is meant to be spent starting July 1st of 2019. It's not for January spending. It's for July 1st through the next June 30th. So it'll be the 1920 school year revenue. So a little bit about our final results of the operating budgets from last year. The far left column is our fund name, so I'm just giving one line here per fund. There are 18,000 different line items in the general fund, so we'll condense it down to about 9 here. The beginning fund balance of what we started with at the beginning of the year in reserves, add in the revenues in the next column, subtract out the expenses, and then the far right column equals what our ending fund balance was in that fund at the end of the year. So just want to highlight the general fund. That's our biggest fund. We started the year with $19.8 million in reserves. We had $225 million of revenue last year, $218 million of expense. So we added to our reserve. It's now at $26.8 million. So at the very bottom total, if you add up all of our funds together, $308 million of revenues last school year, $305 million of expenditures, so we actually added $3 million to our reserve balances. When we established the budget we proposed this budget back in May, you approved it in late June. The beginning fund balance is what we thought we would have. That was based on what the prior year's budget was. Those numbers are not accurate as we closed out the year. I'm going to show you that on the next one. But where we thought we were going to start was $41 million in total in reserves. You approved $295 million of revenues, $297 million of expense to draw down our reserves to $39 million. So because we actually were able to do budget revisions and get those approved through you last week, then we were able to revise this presentation for tonight and give you the most up-to-date numbers. So again, our beginning fund balance in all actuality was $68.6 million. That matches 2 slides ago what we ended at. And now we have a revenue budget of $297 million, $311 million of expenditures. The reason for the jump in expenditures is a lot of times we allow sites and buildings, departments, construction projects. If there's unspent money at June 30th, we allow it to be carried over and worked into the next year budget after we close out the books and we've been audited. So that's why the expenditures look a little higher. I mean, we're projecting ending at $54 million if we spent every dollar that's been budgeted. I just wanted to note there with asterisks that we did approve the 2018 A and B debt issuances last week. However, we did not work that into the budget yet. We'll catch that on our next budget revision, but that'll be showing the money that we're borrowing and then showing that we're going to spend it. So what are the challenges and the risks in the school district's budget? Really, the biggest risk from my perspective is going back to 2001 when the state legislature at that time took over the majority of funding for school districts. So they are in control of the per pupil funding formula, meaning it's solely at their discretion that our legislators need to work with the governor and come up with an annual per pupil funding amount. The problem that has happened is over that time, over that 15-year plus period, is that it's lagging 9.8% below inflation. So I just did a quick calc before I came in here. If we had that 9.8%, if we just kept up with inflation, we'd have a budget that's about $13 million higher than what it is right now. We'd be restoring many of the services that have been cut over the years as inflation has eroded our buying power. The number 2 risk then is if you can't live within the per pupil funding number that the state assigns, and I think there is no district anymore in the state of Minnesota that can't, because they all have a voter approved referendum. You have to go to the voters to ask for more money. It's controversial. It's a drain on the staff. We spend about 6 months working on that or more, and it's expensive. The hard dollar costs are $120,000 to $140,000 to run every election when we ask for more money. Again, that doesn't count the staff time of working on all the presentations and the media inquiries and so on and so forth. And then the third biggest risk to the school district is special education funding. Very proud of the special education services that we offer in this district. My child receives those services. We need to provide them by law. I'm glad that we do provide them, but we're only getting paid back about 60% of what we spend on them. When special ed was first rolled out, it was supposed to be 40% funded by the federal government, 60% by the state government. So we've been left holding the bill about 40% of those costs. If we had number 3 on this list fixed, number 1 wouldn't matter. Number 2, we could erase the voter approved referendum. We could give that back because we would be able to fund everything that we need to if number 3 was fixed. So when we bring the money in through property taxes on that line by line where there's 11 or 10 different funds, there's only 3 that receive property tax support. So in the general fund, that's where we do general operations, transportation, paying for salaries, utilities, so on and so forth. Community ed is in the middle there. There's some programs supported, but most of community ed is funded by tuition that people pay to take classes or pay for school-age childcare. And then in the debt service fund, we have to pay back any of the bonds that we issue over time as prescribed. So we have to put together a tax levy for that. So this is what the levy looks like if you compare 2018 to 2019. Again, of the approximately $300 million we spend in a year, $56 million of the next year's school budget would be based on property taxes or come from property taxes. That's compared to $52.7 million in this calendar year. But what this slide is missing, what I wish I would have put up there, was that in 2017 it was nearly $54 million. So if you remember, we went down in our tax levy from 17 to 18. We had an empty room that year. This year there's a couple more people that have shown up to express interest, I'm sure, in the property tax levy. But really, if you look at it over a 2-year period, it wouldn't have been a 6.2% increase. It would have been more like a 2 and a 2. 2% would have gotten us from 54 million to 56 million today. Just want to remind you on how the levy is calculated. Almost 60% of it is driven based solely on the number of students. So we're expecting more students in the 2019-20 school year, so that drives a little bit of the increase. The 40% of the budget or of the levy is based on expenditures. So there's a little bit of wiggle room, a little bit of control there that we can manipulate some of our line items, like the long-term facilities maintenance revenue. That's the one that we adjust most often when we want to specifically maybe try to drop the levy or hold it flat. We'll adjust that one line item in particular. And so the 3 or 4 main things that are affecting the increases next year. That long-term facilities maintenance revenue is going up $900,000. School-age childcare for special needs, we're allowed to levy for those extra costs at $700,000. I don't expect that to keep on going like that. We're kind of making up about 2 years of lagging expenses there that have caught up to us now, and so that's hopefully more of a one-time extra bump there. 278 more pupil units, so that's driving about $1 million of the increase, and $25 is the estimated inflation. So when the last operating referendum was approved, it was allowed, or the voters said it's okay to increase it every year at the rate of inflation. We don't get to control what the rate of inflation is. Right now it's being estimated by the Department of Education at 2.24%. So those 4 things are about 95% of the reason why the levy is going up. Director Becker and I had a phone call this afternoon, and we talked about this slide here about the tax base, about it going from $12.8 billion to $13.8 billion. $278 million of that is new construction, new properties going on the tax rolls for the first time. That's good news for all the rest of us who have been on the tax rolls because it kind of spreads the costs out. $759 million of that is not necessarily inflation. A better term we discussed on that is really the assessed values changing, the assessed values going up. So on average, homeowners saw about a 6% increase in their property taxes. I'm sure there are people that saw 30%. I'm sure there's people that saw it go down, just depending on what the characteristics of their particular property were from the last year to the current year. Sorry, this is a little bit small to read, but the most important thing I guess I wanted to point out was right in the middle. The red bar that says $734 is what the tax was for 2018 on a $200,000 house. So if you were fortunate enough that your house didn't go up 6%, the tax would be $721 next year. If your house went up a little bit, then your tax is probably going up a little bit as well. But otherwise, year over year, it would have been a tax cut because, again, the property tax base, there's more businesses and houses to spread the tax across. Commercial industrial, so these are businesses. Again, if you look at that $1 million business, it's $5,281 and then $5,203. So there'd be a small reduction in a commercial property. If you had a farm property, the tax per acre would be going down. We put this chart in just to we put this in our budget book annually, but this kind of just shows that our property taxes on the school portion were relatively flat for many years in a row. And then after the voters approved the operating referendum, it did spike up. And now it's actually coming back down a little bit, partly because the levy went down in total dollars last year. And again, the tax base keeps growing, so it keeps getting spread across more homes, more businesses. We've put this in now for a couple years just to remind people that if you look around the surrounding area, Rochester, Goodhue, Plainview, Elgin, Millville pay the lower taxes compared to everybody else. So if you had a $200,000 home in any of these communities, the bottom 3, us being the third from the bottom, would be less tax paid than if you were in Zumbrota, Byron, Casson, Pine Island, and so on and so forth. And then just looking at the next 2 biggest school districts from us and the next 2 smaller school districts than us across the state, if your house were in Woodbury, you'd pay almost 2 times as much tax on that same priced house as you would in Rochester. So 1,300 compared to 700 something. At this point, I would take questions from the board, and then I would step aside and you can take comments from the public.
Ms. Becker?
Just another comparison question. So back on the district-to-district comparisons with the same size districts. So I know Rochester, 200,000, I know what a $200,000 house is in Rochester. Is a $200,000 house in South Washington or in Robbinsdale, or is that like at the same level? Or would a $200,000 house here, is it closer to $250,000 or?
So that's what my gut would tell me, that
Okay,
yes.
But you don't,
So it would
okay.
be even higher than what this chart is
Maybe it was-
impacting. We just took
okay.
straight up dollars, just to try and show the taxing rate.
okay.
Other questions from board members?
Great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
And then if there are questions from any of you who are here, if you would come up to the microphone, please, and, pardon me? Comments, sorry, comments. Come up to the microphone, state your name and your home address, and please limit your comments to 3 to 5 minutes.
Either way.
Okay. Sit. Hi, I'm Suzanne Ferguson. I really appreciate the time that you guys have given for all of us to come and talk tonight.
Suzanne, can you give me your address?
Yep, it's 826 First Street Southeast here in Rochester.
Thank you.
You're welcome. My husband and I live downtown, obviously, with our 2 children, who are currently in daycare. We moved into our house in August of 2017, and we ourselves have not made any significant, or actually 0 improvements to the house. I opened our personal property taxes right before Thanksgiving, and I was a bit appalled to see a 63.9% increase over the course of 1 year. I'm not here to complain, because I understand the importance and the value of what property taxes bring, and I understand the important resources that they make possible. What I am here to ask of all of you is to be reasonable when implementing these property tax increases, especially for young families with young children and anyone else within the community as well. I get it. We've been told by the county assessors that we are outliers, and most others in Rochester aren't going to be facing the increases that we are facing this year. However, the fact that there can be such a jaw-dropping outlier, it might make others pause, because what if you happen to be the next outlier in the next year? So I'm here to propose that we have an incremental approach to implementing these increases, and a cap like other states across the U.S. For example, in the state of Maryland and in the District of Columbia, they have caps of 10% increases over the course of a year. Again, our increase was 63.9%. I'm not saying that Maryland and DC are the prime examples. I'm just showing examples of what others have done. We are a young family trying to make it work here in Rochester, Minnesota, with the high cost of daycare and now the exorbitant rise in our property taxes. I just hope you will consider my proposal for a thoughtful, reasonable approach to property tax increases, and I really appreciate the time tonight. Do you have any questions?
Thank you so much for your comments.
Thank you.
Appreciate those. Any others who'd care to address the board? Thank you. 7.03, the property tax levy for school district property taxes payable in 2019 will be certified by the school board at its regular meeting scheduled on December 11th, 2018 at 5:30 p.m. And this meeting is adjourned at 6:19 p.m.